Knowing what it takes for the artist to do their job only makes you a better writer. Writer's block is like the bane of every writer's existence. Happen to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. Take a break, go for a walk, think about it, don't think about it. All of that is part of the process. If you're going to pitch yourself as an animation writer, I probably shouldn't even go on the record saying that.
So welcome to the Storyboard Room, an animation industry podcast where we share knowledge and experience to help you get in. I'm Eric Bravo, and for today's exciting episode, we'll be discussing how to write for TV and animation with our very special guest, and actually our first guest ever, Madeline Khare. Madeline is an animation writer who has worked on shows like Cartoon Network's We Baby Bears, Disney's Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and Warner Brothers' Little Ellen. Madeline, thanks for joining us.
Of course, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Because you're an animation writer and a lot of our viewers want to get into animation, and there's many different paths to become a writer in animation. Can you talk about the various paths there are and which path you took to become a writer?
There are plenty of ways to become a writer in animation. Some people just write and they get signed by an agent. Maybe they sign up for a fellowship and they make connections that way through the fellowship. And then they just get a writing job, which is really great for those people. I took a less traditional path. I didn't major in any sort of writing class. Like, I'd only taken one writing class ever. Got out to LA for a job in advertising. Thought that's what I was going to do. And when my internship ended and they didn't have the ability to keep anybody on because they were going through some layoffs, I was out in LA and I realized, like, I can actually go for it. I can just pursue my dream of like working in film and TV. And so I just sort of started networking, reaching out, like, who do I know? What kind of stuff do I want to work on? I realized that all of my favorite sorts of TV shows were animated, and having a background in art, but also writing, I felt like it was kind of the perfect combination of both. And I happened to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody.
Yeah.
So it was a long chain of events and a lot of networking, but they were looking for a temporary PA on a Disney Junior show, and they interviewed me and I got hired, and I started making my connections through working in the production side of animation. And working in production, it is a very good experience. Like, I think that anybody who dreams of being a showrunner one day, I think it's so important to have some production experience if you can get it, because you just see so many more departments, and knowing what it takes for the artists to do their job only makes you a better writer, because you can be more cognizant of them. And you also just get to talk to a lot of people and artists. While I was a PA, I started taking like a comedy writing class at UCB. A lot of studios will have these sort of like continued education programs where you can go take a free writing class. So I did that as well. I built out a writing portfolio once I realized that writing was kind of my path forward. From there and through my network, I was offered my first writer's assistant position on Little Ellen. And there I was working with a ton of writers, and they just kind of groomed me up into my first freelance script. From there, when that show ended, I was the writer's assistant on My Adventures of Superman, but I will clarify, I did not write for the show. My biggest contribution was telling them that they should have... I probably shouldn't even go on the record saying that was my idea. But it was a really good experience, and like, I definitely learned a lot about what it takes to write YA and like more of like a teaser tag, like continuity type of writing. From there, I quickly got my first staff writing job on Baby Bears and then Mickey Mouse. So.
That's awesome. So it kind of seems like networking played a huge part in getting your first job. If you didn't have any experience in the industry, like, how would you go about reaching out to somebody, and who should you reach out to?
That's a great question. I think it never hurts to reach out to anybody who's working in animation because you never know. It's not just writers who pitch shows and become showrunners. Artists also pitch shows and become showrunners. And when they're selling their show and it's about to get greenlit, that's when they hire writers. So you need to know everybody. I do think that I've found the most success networking with creative development execs, and I just keep in contact with those people because they know sort of everything that's going on at their studio, and they can throw your name in the hat when something is about to get greenlit. Recently, a few showrunners have told me that as much as they want to hire their friends, they realize the studios won't always let you. Like they still want you to hire like people that the development execs think are good for it. So like knowing people is half of it, and then having the development execs vouch for you is the other half of it.
For animation, there's so many different genres you could write for. Just curious, what are the types of genres that you could write for?
I am one of those people that believe animation can be anything. If you look at French animation, like I Lost My Body is one of my favorite films, and it is nothing like a Disney or Pixar animated film. It's dark and it's gritty, and like Miyazaki even has like more grittier undertones to it, or just spiritual, creepy undertones. I do think that there's definitely like a prevalence in American animation for like there's a need for comedy in the 6 to 11 space or preschool space. A lot of studios will hire you primarily on those things, but I don't think that like being in animation is exclusive to any of that either. Personally, I love writing for comedy. I think that's like my strong suit. I think I could write any age range. I have written many age ranges, and I also have a special interest in like dystopian sci-fi, but haven't written for that professionally yet.
You have written for preschool, and I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of that. And I've heard if you write for preschool, you kind of get stuck in the preschool field. But I've also heard to just get your first writing credit however you can. Can you explain like what's your stance on that?
As I kind of said earlier, most of the American audience and jobs that you will write for in animation are going to be 6 to 11 or preschool comedy. And I'm kind of a believer that if you're going to pitch yourself as an animation writer, that you're probably going to work on preschool at some point in your life. Within preschool, it's so broad. I've worked on educational preschool, I've worked on non-educational preschool, and the two could not be more different. I like to look at preschool like you have Bluey, you have City of Ghosts, you have Shape Island, you've got so much preschool, and then you've got Mickey Mouse Clubhouse or Coco Melon. Like, I think that you're gonna end up writing it anyways. So I wouldn't turn down work just because you don't want to get stuck in preschool. Like, you're probably gonna write it if you're gonna be an animation writer at some point. I do think that preschool takes a different set of skills than something like 6 to 11 or YA or adult. There's definitely like certain briefs that you need to hit with a preschool audience that is different in 6 to 11, and it's different in YA, and it's different for adult. There's definitely a unique set of challenges that comes with each age range and demographic that some people like to specialize in. Okay. I've worked in YA, I've worked in preschool. I see myself flip-flopping between the two in the future again. And so I would never limit yourself based on an age range. So long as the media speaks to you and is something that you're passionate about, I think you gotta write it.
Yeah, and I think that's really great advice. It's kind of moving on. Writing a script can be a daunting experience, and there's just so many moving parts. You want to get a good idea, you want to write a good logline, a premise, then an outline, and then the first draft. What are some common challenges you face while writing?
That's a great question. Writer's block is like the bane of every writer's existence. Everybody struggles with it at some point. Professionally speaking, I find writing scripts a lot easier because at that point, you have gone from springboard to premise to outline, and now you're in a script. So you're so familiar with the story by now. You've got a really good outline of like what to go forward with. The hardest part when you're given such a clear brief to write the script is when you realize something's not working. Because at that point, the outline is approved and you don't want to change too much or it could create a lot of issues down the line. But you do want to make sure that everything is, going smoothly. And if it's a comedy, that every beat is funny and like, you're punching it up as much as you can. When something isn't working, I definitely sit there and stare at the screen a lot longer and try to figure it out. I do find that writing off the outline can be really helpful because it just puts something in the final draft document for you to like look forward to. And it's not like you're staring at an empty page. You kind of remember like you've done this before, you can do it again. But yeah, when something isn't working, I think that's the hardest part. You just have to like take a break, go for a walk, think about it, don't think about it. All of that is part of the process. And just remember at the end of the day, like you've written the outline, you can write the script. And then when it comes to writing your own stuff, and maybe you're writing off an outline and maybe you're not, I find that way harder because you don't have a brief, you don't have somebody telling you what to do with it. Like it's entirely your own. And the hardest challenge that I find when I'm writing for myself is just the anxiety, like, am I writing something good or not? And I find like I could have a clear outline, I could have it all ready to go and laid out. And I get to the scene where something isn't working properly and I just totally freeze. And even though I know exactly where I'm supposed to go, I just start overthinking it and overthinking it and overthinking it. I think the thing that helps me the most is somebody on Baby Bears told me, when you're writing a draft and you get stuck, try to write the absolute worst version you can come up with first. And then once it's done, you can fix it later. By telling yourself, I'm going to write a bad version of this script, you free yourself to actually write the script because you no longer care if it's good or not. You just care about writing it and having fun doing it. Especially in comedy, if you're trying to write something that's bad, it just frees your mind to like throw in the bad jokes that you normally would overthink. And then you never know, like, if somebody else reads it or if you reread it later, maybe that joke that you thought was bad when you were writing it, but you didn't care and you still wrote it, maybe it makes you laugh later on. You never know what kind of good stuff comes from freeing yourself of trying to write something perfect or good and just doing the act of writing. And then again, like I said, you can always edit it later, and editing is so much less daunting than a blank page.
There's a ton of different writing structures out there. I know when I first started writing, I was overwhelmed. Like I didn't know what a 3-act structure, 4-act, 5-act, Dan Harmon's writing circle, the writer's journey. What do you find is the most useful and easiest writing structure to follow for up and coming writers?
Each type of structure kind of depends on what you're trying to write. If you're trying to write a drama, then maybe like the 5-act structure would be better, or even something that has more continuity and you want those teaser tags. If you're writing something for 6 to 11, that's just comedy, reset to 0 every time, you probably don't need that teaser tag and you can just do the 3-act structure. Dan Harmon's story circle is also really useful. I started out using that. 3-act and 5-act doesn't really prevent you from using the story circle. That's more of like a tool for your character's journey. But I think at the end of the day, you should just kind of use whatever you resonate most with for the type of writing you're going to do. So if you want continuity, try to make sure you have those teaser tags. If you don't want continuity, you don't need them. So maybe start with a 3-act. I think at the end of the day, you should probably be writing what you're most passionate about. And if it has continuity, go for that. And if it doesn't, keep it simple.
Can you just walk us through your typical writing process, writing like something original to you from idea to, a final script that you could send out?
Everybody is different when it comes to like how you start your idea and your creative process. I think my ideas tend to start with a hook, just something that I think is cool and will like lead to a lot of opportunity for cool stories. And from that hook, I think about like the characters that live in that world and like how are they interacting with it? What are they learning from it? And what is the overall like message that I am trying to portray? And how can I reflect the characters interacting with the world in a way that, you know, showcases that message? And then from there, you have to come up with a pilot, like a starting point for the show. That's always the hardest part, getting a pilot to be really tight and buttoned up. It's like, how can you do the exposition as fast as possible? Like shortest possible act one always. Like the shorter you can get it, the better. So if you can get to done with act one and page two, you're doing great, you know. Act two is where all the juicy stuff is anyways. The biggest challenge is setting up your characters and the world as succinctly as possible in a pilot. But that just comes with time and like really knowing your characters. I try to lay out who all of my characters are, what the world is, and like kind of the rules of that world. There's a lot of different like story prompts that can help you start off your pilot. Like, is this the first time these characters are meeting? And that's what starts the story. Does something happen? Like in Amphibia, she, you know, wakes up in a new world and it's like, whoa, where am I? And trying to get back home. You know, sometimes it's as simple as that. One device that is easy to use is introducing new characters to the stand-in for the audience. So like one character should be your audience and they don't know who any of these people are. And as they meet them, the audience meets them. Another way would just be to establish your characters through scenes that really tell us who they are. I think that that's really useful, especially in like adult dramas. I love to see a scene that you don't know what the purpose of it is until the character just makes a choice that nobody else but that character would make. There's definitely a lot of different ways to kind of get into the story. Well, for me, I start with a hook and then I build the characters in the world and how they relate to each other. And then I move from there.
How much of your personality and like how much of your personal experience do you put in the scripts?
I definitely tend to inject a lot of my perspective on the world and maybe how I felt in a situation into my scripts, because when you write from a place of knowing how it feels to go through something, it tends to feel more genuine. In my personal work, it's definitely more apparent how much of me is in them. And in my professional work, then you have the unique challenge of saying, how do these characters that I didn't create, you know, relate to each other? You know, you probably still pitch stories where the emotional journey is something that you can relate to. I think it's hard to write a story that you don't relate to at all, unless you're just trying to do something that's like so the opposite. Like, hopefully you don't relate to like White Lotus or something. Like, hopefully you don't relate to Uncut Gems, but but maybe you do, or like, you know, somebody, or you have like a personal experience with somebody like that, and then you kind of can go from there. Writing for characters you didn't create, you do need to put them in a scenario that resonates with you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like, this is how I would go about it. It could be, how would you change? You know, like, how would you change what you did in that situation you relate to? Or like, how do you wish you had acted in that situation? You know, you're making it up. Like, you can change how it happens if you want.
So now that we kind of have like a basic understanding of, you know, writing and writing structure, how do you go about building your portfolio, your writing portfolio to send out?
For your writing portfolio, you're going to want several scripts. For your first script, just write something you're really passionate about. If you're passionate about it, it'll just come out really authentic and people will resonate with that. There's like a lot of criteria, like different managers look for different things in your portfolio. Like some people will say you need like an hour drama and a half-hour comedy, or you need XYZ in your portfolio. But ultimately, I think you just need at least 2 originals. And it should just be what you want to write. And the more you write what you want to write, the more people will hire you on projects that are similar to what you want to write. But you definitely need at least 2.
And after you get a solid portfolio, after you get your 2 scripts ready, the logical next step is to get work. And to get work, most people think you need to get represented. And just so we have a background of the different types of representation that's out there, can you explain the difference between an agent, a manager, and an entertainment lawyer?
An agent will tend to pitch you to different shows that are looking for writers and help negotiate your contract just a little bit. And then they take a percentage of everything that you make. A manager tends to be a little bit more hands-on. If you're a writer, I think a manager is probably what you should go for, because a lot of good managers will read your work, potentially give you homework, like they're going to look for this in the next 6 months, so why don't you write XYZ type of script, like an adult comedy or something, like they're looking for that, so go ahead and write that. They'll give you notes on your scripts or your pitches, and they'll also give you people to network with sometimes, or just the goal of networking with 5 new people, for instance. I think that like when you're getting a manager, that's what you should strive for, is somebody that will work with you and like help you become a better writer and give you that feedback, because ultimately you're going to pay them a percentage of everything you make, and that adds up to a lot of money. So you definitely want them to like be doing some work for you in that regard. And an entertainment lawyer is not going to read your scripts or anything. They are there when you get the gig to get you better pay. I think everybody agrees they love their lawyers. Like if you are getting a writing gig, get a lawyer. It'll be worth it in the end for sure.
Yeah, I've heard that too, where some writers don't even have agents or managers, and they just have an entertainment lawyer for when they get that deal and when they have to negotiate, and they're always happy with that. I haven't heard anyone like talk badly about their lawyers, which is very surprising. But
that's what I have. When I got my last writing gig, I signed with a lawyer, and it was no regrets. Love my lawyer. Yeah.
And do you do it per job, or is it like kind of like how an agent, you sign them and they're with you?
It like when you sign with anybody, the contract will always be a little different. A lot of agents and managers will take a percentage of whatever work you get, whether they were involved in getting you that work or not, until they get you more work. So that can be like the price you pay to have an agent or a manager. I do think for whatever reason, people think you're a more credible person if you've got an agent or a manager. I wish it wasn't that way, because if you're paying somebody and they're not like getting you any work, then it can be a very frustrating cycle to be in. And it does add up to like a lot of money, like thousands and thousands of dollars that you're just paying down the drain if they're not working for you. So make your people work for you because you're paying them. And with a lawyer, though, they typically do it as like a gig by gig basis. So if you want to use them for your gig, then they take a percentage. Typically it's 5. Some other lawyers will ask for like 10 or something else. I don't know. If you don't use your lawyer, they're not going to take a percentage of the rest of what you make. If you're the type of person who networks a lot and can manage to get the gigs or talk to the right people, then having a lawyer definitely helps, because you get like way more pay, and you do pay them a percentage of that back, but they also can put in protections with your contract. So like if, for instance, you sign with a studio and for your staff writing gig and they want you to be exclusive to that studio, but you have a pitch that you really want to pitch at a different studio, your lawyer can help put loopholes in that contract, so that way you can work at multiple studios at the same time, or freelance at other studios without being in trouble. So a lawyer they do more than just negotiate higher pay. They also negotiate like better opportunity for your overall growth as a writer. And they also can put things in like severance pay, which is really nice. So lawyers definitely do a lot of work for what you're paying them. And agents and managers, I've heard wonderful stories of people who have great experiences with their managers or agents, and they're working with them, they're getting them a ton of work, they're getting them good pay, but it just varies. It's like you just have to find the best fit for yourself, but I think everybody does like their lawyers the best.
Yeah. And do you recommend up and coming writers like be focused on getting an agent or manager?
If the opportunity presents itself, it doesn't hurt, because a lot of studios will see you as like a credible writer if you get signed. If you're going to do it, be picky. Like, don't go for just anybody. Go for only the people that you really have a good relationship with and feel like you can work with and grow from them.
After you get an agent or representation, or if you choose not to go down that path, I am curious, like, what are the steps of getting hired as a staff writer on the show?
Yeah, in my experience, it can go down several ways. Sometimes it starts out as freelance. That's kind of like a test. They pay you for a freelance script. You write it. If they like it, they hire you full time if they have that ability. But obviously, not every freelance is going to be like an interview for a staff writing job. So I wouldn't be like, I freelanced and then, and then they didn't hire me full time. What's up with that? Like, I just can't. So yeah. It just kind of depends. When I freelanced for Baby Bears, and then they liked it and they had the opportunity to hire someone and they asked me to do it. And so that's how that one went down. For Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, I interviewed and submitted some samples, and then I got the offer like the next week. But typically the way I have gotten them in the past is I've talked to a development exec at the right time, gotten very lucky that they liked me and pitched me to a team of writers. They send the development exec sends them like my website or a script that they liked that I wrote, and when they read it, the people who have the ability to pick who they're interviewing, they read the script and I guess they like it because they extend me an interview, and then you interview with them. You see if you just gel personality wise and like workflow wise. Maybe you get a freelance out of that. Maybe you get a staff thing out of that, and then you're good to go. It's a lot of luck. And also having that sample that stands out. I've gotten feedback like on my own portfolio. I have like UCB sketches on there that are really short and easy to read. A lot of people like having that short thing because they're sitting there reading like a ton of scripts. If it's a comedy that you're going for, if you can make them laugh really quickly, like that's going to go a long way. I can't really speak to like if it's a drama because I've never worked on a drama, but I'm sure there are different things that people are looking for the different genres. The goal should be your originals should keep them interested enough to keep reading, Yeah. And if you can do that, and especially in comedy, if you can make them laugh, and preferably in a shorter amount of time, that's what they're looking for sure.
You did mention one way to get hired as a staff writer is to get a freelance opportunity. How would one go about getting that freelance script?
In my experience, I've only freelanced twice. One when I was a writer's assistant. And so I was already in the room, and it was the second half of the season, and it was a huge episode order. I had just kept saying, like, I'm interested in writing. Here's my portfolio. I set up portfolio reviews with my, leads to see like, what could I improve on? If I'm going to be a writer's assistant, I'm going to learn something. Like I went with it with that approach, that mindset of like, I want to learn everything I can from these people, and also show them that I can improve and grow as a writer. And if I get the script, I get the script, and that's great. But if I don't, then at least I'm learning something, like while I'm a writer's assistant, I'm going to take advantage of it. One day they read it and they said, I think you're ready for your script. And they had the opportunity to freelance it out. And when you're a writer's assistant, there's issues with how you're paid for your freelance because you're already full-time employed by the studio. potentially through the union, and there's like limitations to it. So sometimes you can only do it like there's like a limited amount of scripts that you can write per season, or perhaps you just, they don't know how to work around the payment for doing freelance on top of your full-time job. So sometimes it's not an opportunity for every writer's assistant. I think our union is trying to make it, like especially with the associate writer position. I think things are changing in that regard, and it's moving towards a world where writer's assistants, or associate writers at least, would be able to write on the show that they're also coordinating for. But it's kind of in like a gray area right now. So it's really show specific, and having leadership that fights for you is always going to be like the best thing you can have. So like if you are in that script coordinator position or writer's assistant position, like be best friends with your showrunner, learn everything you can. And if it doesn't happen, like don't take it to heart. Just keep learning everything you can. Having that job is being a baby writer, whether or not you have that freelance script. So just learn everything you can. The other way I got it was for Baby Bears. And that again started out with me talking to a development exec. I sent them my stuff. They thought it was good. Honestly, in that call with that development exec, I was like, this person doesn't like me. I was like, I'm never getting anything out of this. I was so convinced it wasn't going anywhere. And then like a week later, they reached out. They were like, we want to interview you or freelance. And then it turned into a staff writing thing. So you just got to keep going for it. Even if you don't think it's going anywhere, you never know. Maybe it is.
I feel like sometimes, and I've had this experience too, where you just go for an interview or go for a job and you're just like, I did not get that. And then like the next day, like they just like, oh, we want to hire you. It's like so crazy to think about. But I just wanted to touch upon, like, once you're in the writing room, just curious, can you describe the energy in the writer's room? Does it tend to be more collaborative or independent? And also, how do you balance having fun and being productive?
That's, yeah. I keep saying that's a great question. And I'm like, wow, every time you ask a question, I'm just like, yeah, that's a great question. I got to think of another way to say that. But the energy in a writer's room is very, very show specific. I would say the majority of rooms are more collaborative, and it depends on the writers you've got in there. Some writers are like, let's spitball ideas all the time. And other writers prefer to be a little more reserved and think a lot and like carefully craft an idea before they pitch it and kind of like feel out the room a little bit. The vibes of the rooms can be different depending on who is in the room. I've also been in rooms where we just like don't collaborate much at all. And it's almost like freelance. You say your brief, maybe it's a little bit of a collaboration to get your springboard shaped up for premise, and then they just launch you on that, and then it's very like you and the story editor are working together. But other rooms I've been in, it's like all the writers and the story editors, we're all reading each other's scripts, we're noting, we're punching it up. It takes careful observation to know how much you should just go for it and how much you should craft your idea and then go for it. It depends on your leadership and also your fellow writers.
In a writer's room, you usually help break a story for an episode. Can you explain the concept of breaking a story?
So again, it totally depends on like the type of writer's room you're in. I'll say this. More times than not, in a comedy writer's room, you'll have a meeting where you bring a ton of really loose one-sentence springboard ideas. And you basically sit in a room together and you read out your little one sentence. And you see what the other writers hear and think of, and you just bounce off of each other. So to break a story, you want to make sure that your little nugget of an idea has sort of a beginning, a middle, and end. And depending on the type of structure that your show is, you want to make sure it's hitting all the beats of the structure.
I've heard animation writers can fall in like two different groups, those who are part of TAG and those who are part of WGA. Can you explain the difference between TAG writers and WGA writers?
To me, there's no difference other than the union in which they are in, because writing is writing. And I'm a big proponent of writing is writing. And if you write live action, you can write animation. And if you write animation, you can write live action. It's just a slight nuance for like how the script is written and what things you need to call out, because the production pipeline is going to be a little bit different in animation, especially when it comes to like dialogue. You need to make sure that all dialogue is called out in animation, because if you say like humph, somebody has to go into a record booth and record humph 3 different ways, like oh. Like, you know, they have to do it all the different ways, and then somebody has to take that sound bit and edit it into like a whole thing. Versus in live action, you just have somebody with a boom recording what's actually in the room, and it's kind of at the actor's discretion, like what little sounds they make. Aside from those differences, writing is still writing, and there's really not going to be that much of a difference between a WGA writer and an animation writer. And in fact, some people are both. The main difference is that it's just different unions. So there are companies underneath the umbrella of the network. Each of those companies have signed with either WGA or TAG, or, you know, if they're non-union, then they don't have a contract with either of those studios. And those studios basically say, we agree to meet the minimums of whatever the union's contract is. With the Animation Guild, it covers animation writers, and WGA can cover an animated show. It's just a little more complicated for animation to be covered by WGA, but it's possible and it happens. The main differences in the unions, WGA is the one that everybody knows. They have really great benefits and pay, and they are the ones that are always striking and getting a really good contract fighting AI. And the Animation Guild covers writers, but it also covers most other production roles in animation. Whereas like with WGA, it only covers writers, and all of the other parts of production are covered by their own separate unions under IATSE. When the writers go to bat, they're only batting for the writers, and like they don't have to negotiate for any other type of position. But when the Animation Guild goes up to bat, they have to negotiate for all the positions underneath the animation umbrella. The benefits are for literally everybody in animation and not just writers or just directors or whatever. The Writers Guild, they have more protections for writers in a lot of ways. If you're planning to write for animation or for live action, it's a good goal to have to get into WGA somehow. If you can be WGA eligible or be in WGA and then go back to writing for animation, it tends to be like a selling point for yourself to get better pay and like residuals. Animation writers don't get residuals other than for songs.
I feel like in today's age, having an online brand is super important, especially for artists. How crucial is it for an animation writer to establish and maintain an online presence?
If you don't have a social media presence, it's not going to hurt you. But if you do have a social media presence as a writer, it's going to help you, especially for younger generations where it comes a little more easy and like intuitive for us. I think it's definitely a good idea to be putting stuff out there for social media, because like you never know, like maybe you decide you don't want to work for the studios and you want to do like a Kickstarter campaign. Having that social presence is going to help you so much. If you have that social presence, then it brings a lot of weight when you pitch your own show and you want to sell it to a studio and do it the more traditional way. I think it's a really good thing to have for sure. Yeah. It's not necessary. Like if it stresses you out too much to do social media, then don't do it. But if you have the knack for it, absolutely go for it, because it'll only help you.
It's kind of like a free marketing, but I could tell sometimes, even for myself, it could be a little overwhelming to make sure, you know, you post something and, you know, you want to get as much eyes on it. So I could see how stressful it could get, but also how useful it could be too. And are there any books or tools that you recommend for aspiring animation writers to check out?
I think my favorite book that I've read for writing was Stephen King's memoir on writing. There's a lot of good wisdom about speaking plainly and just keep writing. And it's a great place for beginners who are interested in writing to start. It's an inspirational book. It talks about the struggles of being a writer from, Stephen King's life. And it also just talks about the basics of writing that will make you a good writer, which is ultimately being a good communicator.
Just as we wrap up here, is there any advice that you like to share with aspiring animation writers?
If I had to leave with one nugget of wisdom, it would be to write stuff you're passionate about and to not stop. The more you proclaim that you are a writer and that you can do it, the more other people will believe you and hire you. So just keep going for it and don't be discouraged if you get feedback. Use it to your advantage. Take what you can, leave what you need to, and just keep going for it.
On that note, thank you so much, Madeline, for coming on the show and sharing your experience with our viewers. Our goal here at the Storyboard Room is to share knowledge and personal experience to help our audience grow and learn on their journey into animation. And I guarantee you, everything you shared here will be super helpful for those aspiring writers out there and anyone just trying to break in. Is there any work that you like to share? Like, do you have any upcoming projects or recent work that you'd like the audience to know about?
Well, some of the episodes that I wrote for We Baby Bears are going to be airing pretty soon this year. So definitely keep an eye out for that. I'm excited to share that with the world for sure.
Awesome. And what's the best way for our viewers to keep up to date with you?
Yeah, if you'd like to keep in touch, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn name is Madeline Khare. I'm also on Instagram, but it's just a bunch of fluff of what I'm doing, what dogs I'm fostering these days. Sometimes I take a while to respond to people who are reaching out, but I try to respond eventually to everybody. So definitely feel free to find me on socials and I'll get back to you.
On that note, thank you so much again, Madeline, for coming out, and thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on a podcast app, go ahead and rate this 5 stars and subscribe. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel at Eric Bravo, give that video a like and subscribe. It really helps us continue making content like this. And thanks for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day, guys. Bye.